And welcome to the February 11th, 2025 Eugene Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to call this meeting to order. My name is Jason Lear, and I'm chair of the Eugene Planning Commission. To begin this evening, I'd like to call on Commissioner Edwards for the city's land acknowledgement statement.
Great. Thank you, Chair Lear. Since time immemorial, the Kalapuya people have been the indigenous stewards to our region, building dynamic communities, maintaining balance with wildlife, and enacting sustainable land practices. This land acknowledgement is a way of resisting the erasure of indigenous histories and to honor Native communities by inviting truth and reconciliation. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. As we consider the impacts of colonization, we also acknowledge the strength and resiliency of displaced indigenous people. The city of Eugene is built within the traditional homelands known as the Kalapuya Ilahi. Kalapuya descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. They continue to make contributions in our communities here and across the lands. We express our respect for the inherent political sovereignty of all federal, recognized tribal nations and indigenous people who live in the state of Oregon and across the nation. Therefore, the Planning Commission recognizes that what we do today will affect many generations who will come after us.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Edwards, and thank you to everyone joining us in this virtual meeting format. Today, our meeting will begin with public comment, followed by a work session on urban growth strategies. Anyone wishing to join the meeting online can do so by following the instructions listed on the agenda for this meeting. Planning Commission meetings can also be viewed by watching the live stream available on our website or the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21. For those who join the meeting via computer, device, or phone, your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically muted when you enter the meeting as an attendee. If you wish to participate during the public comment portion of the meeting and haven't already done so, please raise your virtual hand now to join the speaker's queue in one of two ways. For those viewing the meeting on a computer, laptop, or other device, click once on the blue hand icon. For those listening to the meeting on a phone, press *9. Public comment is an opportunity for individuals to speak to the Planning Commission on any topics except for items scheduled for public hearing or public hearing items for which the record has already closed. As a reminder, your hand must be raised to be in the queue for public comment. Crystal, do you see if we've got anyone who'd like to make public comment?
I do not see anyone who has their hand raised.
Okay, perfect. As always, feel free to contact staff if there are comments you are not able to provide or wish to get us in a different manner. And so I'll now close public comment. Moving on to our next agenda item, I'd like to turn it over to Terry Harding to begin the staff presentation. Following the staff presentation, the commission will have the opportunity to ask questions. Terry?
Great, thank you, Commissioner Lear. Good evening, commissioners and members of the public who might be watching. My name is Terry Harding. I'm the principal planner for community planning and design with the city of Eugene. And tonight we'll have three of us taking parts of this presentation to give you an update on urban growth and housing planning. So our agenda is a brief project refresher where I'll give you an update on and reminders about what urban growth strategies is. And then we'll move into a policy development update where Stuart will give you some updates about the comprehensive plan. And then we'll turn it over to Leah Rausch, who will walk you through housing planning requirements and actions that the city will need to take to address our housing need. And we'll conclude the meeting with a description of our 2026 adoption package and what might be in that. And we will also incorporate a break for questions after the policy development updates before we get into the housing planning segment of the agenda. So urban growth strategies is identifying the tools, actions, policies, and land needed for the next 20 years to support living wage jobs and housing that everyone can afford. Building off years of planning and community engagement through Envision Eugene, this project is evaluating the need for housing, jobs, parks, infrastructure, and schools as well as what tools can help Eugene to grow more efficiently. This work will result in studies of what land is available in Eugene, updates to the Comprehensive Plan and Land Use Code, a new land use designation map, and an evaluation of whether there is a need to expand the urban growth boundary to meet that housing need. And just a little hint, we're pretty sure there will be. This suite of work also advances many of our city priorities, including completing the Envision Eugene Comprehensive Plan, as I said, and coordinating with the Housing Implementation Pipeline, our Climate Action Plan, Parks and Rec System Plan, and the City Strategic Plan. Urban growth strategies contain several phases: community engagement, where we'll identify the needs and priorities of community members for housing, jobs, and access to community assets; the policy development phase, where we will integrate the results of the community engagement and technical analysis to create and update the policies guiding land use in Eugene; the housing and jobs actions phase, where we will identify actions to take to address our identified needs, especially related to housing production, affordability, and choice; and lastly, the land supply studies phase. We'll complete a technical analysis of land needed for jobs, housing, and other urban uses. Today, we'll briefly touch on the first two, and then we'll spend most of our time on housing needs and actions. And we will come back to you at a future date on jobs needs and actions and with those land supply studies. So this timeline is in your packet for your reference. There's a lot going on here, but basically the planning work that is underway is leading to the Council's first chance to adopt policies, housing, and jobs actions in 2026. You can see the green bars lining up where they say adoption in 2026. There will be another adoption package with more actions and the land supply studies in 2027, and a third adoption package in 29 to 30 to adopt any necessary UGB expansion. And that analysis work on the urban growth boundary will start in 2027. So briefly, here's a peek at some of the community engagement that is underway. Our community engagement plan, which you all approved last February, includes a variety of integrated tactics and activities, both general, broad, and focused to specific communities. Many of these are already underway, with more coming up over the next 2 years. The things I'd like to highlight for you that are coming up next are more engagement opportunities and the Equity Advisory Panel, which is launching in March. And that will build on what we've learned from past equity panels that the city has run. And we're excited to have community collaborators running that for us from working with a group of BIPOC community members.
Good evening, commissioners. As Terry mentioned, we're building off of years of community engagement and technical analysis and have begun drafting comprehensive plan goals and policies. Tonight, we're excited to share with you that we've released our first public draft of the Community Engagement Chapter's Goals and Policies, which is attachment C of your packet. Tonight, I'm going to talk about what a comprehensive plan is, provide a little bit of background on our comprehensive plan, and share an overview of the draft goals and some of the policies for Chapter 1, which is our Community Engagement Chapter. We have some time for questions and input after my presentation, but I'd also like to encourage you to provide your input through our survey on the Urban Growth Strategies Engage Eugene page, which is open to the public. That survey is open for you to go in there, and you can provide us as long of feedback as you would like to, and it will give you some time to kind of work through those individual goals and policies on your own time. The comprehensive plan guides the city in its land use planning for future growth within the urban growth boundary. The Envision Eugene Community Vision describes Eugene's existing environmental, economic, and human context. It contains 7 pillars that express shared community values in Eugene and provide the foundation for which the city plans for growth. Each chapter has a series of goals that articulate the overarching aspirations of the community. They are broad statements that describe our hopes for the way our community will grow. These goals are being developed in response to years of community engagement through Envision Eugene and current needs and priorities that we're hearing from the community through ongoing community engagement activities. Each chapter also contains policies intended to help the city attain its goals. These policies will provide a consistent course of action and move the community towards attainment of these goals. Once adopted, the policies guide the work of the city manager and staff in formulating proposed changes to development regulations, long-range planning projects, and financial decisions. Historically, Eugene, Springfield, and Lane County have shared a regional comprehensive plan called the Eugene-Springfield Metropolitan Area General Plan, or Metro Plan for short. Over time, Eugene and Springfield have been developing their own local comprehensive plans to provide land use direction within their urban growth boundaries, or UGBs. Because of the resource-intensive nature of moving from one comprehensive plan to another, the Envision Eugene Comprehensive Plan is being developed in 3 phases. The first phase was adopted in with Eugene's UGB in 2017. Phase 2, the current phase, is scheduled for completion in 2026, when the City of Eugene City Council and Lane County Board of Commissioners will consider these new chapters for adoption. This phase includes chapters on community engagement, compact development, housing, community health, public facilities and services, and land use. The land use chapter will include a parcel-specific land use designation map to replace the Metro Plan diagram within Eugene's urban growth boundary. Using what we learned from the community and our research, staff have begun drafting goals and policies for these chapters, and a draft land use designation map is now available for preview. This winter and spring, we are rolling out each draft chapter's goals and policies, and we'll be coming back to the Planning Commission in June to share this work and what we have heard from the public. Tonight, I'm focusing on the community engagement chapter, which currently has 3 goals and 16 policies. This chapter sets the goals and policies that guide the City of Eugene's community engagement efforts for our legislatively adopted planning processes that have the potential to create significant impacts on members of underserved community groups and/or significant impacts citywide. An example of a legislatively adopted planning process was the recent Middle Housing Code Amendment process that produced significant citywide impacts. As a reminder, Attachment C contains the full draft goal and policy language for your reference. The first goal in the chapter is equitable and outcome-oriented community engagement. Under this draft goal, there are currently 7 draft policies that help attain the goal. A few examples of draft policies include welcoming experience. This policy provides direction to planning staff to design and implement community engagement opportunities that create a welcoming environment that encourages broad participation and a sense of belonging. Another draft policy is titled Design for Equity, which guides the work of planning staff to prioritize the needs of people who will be most impacted by the planning process and have the least amount of power to influence it. Demographic diversity directs planning staff to work to increase participation by people from underserved community groups on boards, commissions, panels, and other city-sponsored entities. This section contains other draft policies like encouraging young people and more. The second draft goal is accessible, accountable, and transparent engagement processes. To help realize this goal, staff have drafted 6 policies. The draft policies include community engagement plans, which contains a series of sub-policies that provide direction to staff about how community engagement plans should be used and developed, including how the community should be involved and how these plans are drafted, and how the Planning Commission will ultimately be asked to approve the plan. This policy will help increase transparency and effectiveness of community engagement plans in the future. Multiple opportunities and formats directs staff to provide formal and informal engagement opportunities in all phases of legislatively adopted planning processes. outreach. This draft policy includes direction to staff to continue to assess the best ways to invite community members into engagement opportunities. Other draft policies in this section cover topics like foundation for an engaged community, post-engagement evaluations, and documentation and feedback. The last draft goal is titled Foster Healthy Dialogue. This goal has 3 draft policies. They are cultivating partnerships and relationships, which directs planning staff to partner with other city departments and divisions to develop and foster relationships with a broad range of community leaders and organizations. Community member compensation sets policy for compensating members of underserved community groups to help encourage their participation in legislatively adopted planning processes. And lastly, a policy about advisory panels, which provides planning staff some direction about when to use advisory panels and how those panels are structured. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to you all for questions and feedback.
Okay, perfect. Does anybody have any questions about this part of the presentation? Looks like we're ready to proceed. Oh, Commissioner Beeson, go ahead.
I'll be quick. I'll be quick. I missed what you said. It was there were 3 phases when you were talking a bit ago about the comprehensive plan. The phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 2 at the end of 2026. I'm sorry, I missed. What is phase 3?
We have not decided yet when phase 3 will kick in, Commissioner Beeson, but it's on our work plan for sometime in the future. And it will include 2 draft chapters or 2 new policy chapters on resilience and natural resources.
Thank you. Thank you. One other, a quick question. So when we're all done with the comprehensive plan work, or at the end of phase 3 and the land use diagram is in place and all that, is there, I have asked this before in the distant past, does the metro plan kind of recede away and not, will it be around for, are there other uses for it that'll still be there?
Yeah.
I'm going to let Terry handle this question.
Yeah, and I saw Alyssa pop on too, so jump in if you want to, Alyssa.
Okay.
We will still be a party to the Metro Plan. We are still in the Metro area and have some decisions that are guided by regional policies. However, we're migrating the chapters that Stuart went through, plus the 2 that will come in phase 3 over to our own policies. So it will still exist, but it'll be a lot slimmer, and our reliance on it will not be, we'll have our own policies for everything that we control within our urban growth boundary. And the things that we share with Springfield and or Lane County will be guided by those regional policies.
Thank you. Thanks.
Commissioner Edwards.
Great, thank you. I just have a question. Something perked my attention. There's mention of engagement kind of by, lots of different community members and focusing on engaging, folks who are normally don't have, as easy time accessing the process. I am curious how you are evaluating. Hold on, I just lost it here. I'm looking at the slide, so hang on here. Oh shoot, I lost it. Oh, on the advisory panels, I'm just curious about what specific information are you seeking in this process, if that makes sense?
Specific to advisory panels, or?
Sure, let me rephrase my question because I just remembered what it was I was wanting to ask. When you're talking about folks who are most impacted by decisions, I'm wondering how you're evaluating how you know who is most impacted. What are you considering when you're thinking, oh, we got to make sure we talk to all the people who are going to be most impacted? Who are those people?
It's a really good question, and it's something that we talk a lot about, whether it's in planning school or just amongst our staff, is like, who are the people who we need to speak to the most? And so we kind of do an analysis about what the project is and then who those folks may be that might be most impacted. And we have a couple tools that we use that are part of some of our trainings that the city offers called the belonging trainings. So we tend to look at folks who are kind of close to the issue and who have lived experience and also have some sort of local experience. So they either work in the community or they live in the community. And then we try to include them in our processes as best we can. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but it's specifically, you're looking at for individuals then representing their lived experience. Is that what I'm hearing?
They're individuals, but in my experience so far, we tend to work with like community organizations or folks who have a broader network out in the community.
Okay.
Maybe an example would help. The Equity Advisory Panel that we're putting together for Urban Growth Strategies that's launching next month has been assembled from community groups that are specifically called out in the housing planning rules. So we have some guidance there that's pretty direct and benchmarks that we're expected to reach in our engagement. So for that one, we have kind of a list and a way to approach that. I would also say advisory panels are one of our tools, and they're one of our focused outreach tools. We also have a whole bag of tools that are tools in our toolbox that are more broad in nature. And those are open to anyone. And we want to make sure that we have both in our toolbox, that we have ways to reach broad members that are interested and maybe impacted. We may learn things from them that we didn't already know. And then also more focused outreach.
Okay, thanks you guys. It's really helpful.
Commissioner Isaacson?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a quick compliment to staff. I ever since HB 2001, we're constantly learning and improving on our outreach. And I'm glad that I'm seeing, when I see slides like this, I'm seeing new ways of reaching out, new methods of talking to the community, and that's really the takeaway I got from that whole process, is that the people were asking us to change the ruler that we're using to measure our success in this area. So that's great. Thanks, guys.
Okay, and I think we have some more parts of this presentation to continue with. Will it be back to you, Stuart or Terry?
I'm going to take it from here. Thank you, Stuart and Terry. Thank you, commissioners, for your good questions so far. Again, my name is Leah Rausch. I'm a senior planner on the community planning and design team. So I'm going to take the helm for the rest of our presentation, and I'm going to focus on the new framework and legal requirements for housing planning in Oregon. We'll talk a little bit about how we'll implement that within urban growth strategies, and then end on the types of actions that the city can take to meet our local housing needs. So we've been previewing this for you all, with you all for a while, the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis and everything that's going to come with it. So this is going to be our deep dive into that new methodology and approach. Before we get into that, I just want to take a beat to kind of underscore how different the conversation is about housing right now. At the state level, the rules guiding housing planning are being completely rewritten. So the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, which we'll discuss today, is really a new paradigm and shift for housing planning across the state. At the local level, we know that the city has taken significant action to address housing needs. So our strategic plan acknowledges housing and homelessness as urgent community needs. And in the last few years, the city has established an affordable housing trust fund and invested millions in affordable housing projects, prepared for and invested in new housing downtown and at the riverfront, invested in new infrastructure to unlock housing in the Crow Road area, and lots more. As a city and a state, we're working within a different landscape than just a decade ago when we did our last round of housing planning. We know that housing is a fundamental need, and our severe lack of housing impacts all of our work every day. And I think it's just helpful to kind of keep that in mind as we get really into the weeds and the details of our housing need and the approach to housing planning moving forward. As you all likely know, Governor Kotek and the legislature have advanced a series of priorities related to planning for housing, in particular the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, or the ONA, which was part of the 2023 legislative session. So today I'm going to walk through the components of this framework and how we'll implement the ONA locally. So first is our state allocated housing need. So using the ONA methodology, the state will now allocate a 20-year housing need to each city, as well as an 8-year housing production target. Next, Eugene will be required to complete a new analysis to localize and add context to that state allocated need by types, characteristics, and locations of that housing. Next is the housing capacity analysis. So this is an updated analysis focused on the land supply and capacity to accommodate our 20-year housing need. And concurrently, we'll develop a housing production strategy. This is a newly required plan that will identify and prioritize new actions that meet our housing need and further fair housing choice. And finally, the ONA establishes a housing acceleration program. So this new state program will ensure cities comply with these housing planning requirements and make meaningful progress towards meeting our local housing needs. Importantly, the ONA also sets an 8-year planning cycle, meaning we'll take on this work and update our housing planning every 8 years moving forward. So I'm going to start at that first step of the ONA, which is the state allocation of housing need. Our need is based on a complex methodology that determines the need for the entire state, which is then allocated to each region and then to each city. The new approach considers first our future need, which includes population growth, which is what we've planned for in the past. But the ONA newly considers changes in household formation and planning for units lost to second and vacation homes. The ONA also considers our current unmet need, accounting for decades of underproduction, as well as permanent housing for people experiencing homelessness. The state allocated local housing needs on January 1st of this year using this new methodology. Eugene will need roughly 26,000 new dwelling units over the next 20 years. To put that into perspective, we have about 90,000 dwelling units in Eugene today. That means we are planning to increase our housing stock by roughly 30% over the next 20 years. So that's a big number, but how does it compare to actual housing development on the ground? To meet our more comprehensive housing need, Eugene will need to produce 70% more units annually for the next 10 years as compared to the last 10 years. Using data from our growth monitoring program, we know that Eugene saw an average of about 960 units per year over the last decade. Of those, about 100 were subsidized affordable housing each year. To meet our new housing need under the ONA, Eugene should see closer to 1,600 units per year over the next decade, including about 700 each year that are affordable to households with the lowest incomes. So to look at it another way, this graph uses growth monitoring data to show our net new dwelling units from 2013 to 2024. This first gray line shows our currently adopted need from our current housing capacity analysis, where we were planning for about 755 new units each year. This blue line shows the average production since 2013. So we've been exceeding our adopted need, producing about 960 new units each year. At the top, up here in green, is our new housing need, which is based on the 2025 ONA, which would require annual production at roughly 1,600 new units per year over the next 10 years. In addition to giving us our total 20-year need, that 26,000 units, the ONA also segments housing need by affordability. This chart breaks down those 26,000 new dwellings into affordability bins based on area median income, or AMI. On the far left are new units needed for households with the lowest incomes. The bars in green are units needed for households making less than 80% of the area median income, which is typically a level of affordability that can only be provided through subsidized affordable housing. For a household of 4, this group is earning up to about $67,000 per year. Next is our need for moderate income housing, which is households earning between about $67,000 and $107,000 per year. And finally, on the right is our market rate housing, which is households earning more than $107,000 per year. And I recognize this is a lot of data, but I think the bottom line here is that we have an immense need for housing that is affordable to households with the lowest incomes, while simultaneously we're seeing declining federal resources and the funding that we do have isn't going as far. While this new approach is more reflective of our true need, it highlights the challenge ahead. So the next step in the ONA process is to connect our 20-year need to people in our community and their unique individual needs. We'll plan for housing that is affordable to people with all incomes in Eugene, advances fair housing choice and mitigates fair housing issues, and provides adequate housing diversity and choice through a range of housing types, characteristics, and in needed locations. So if you remember, the next step in the process is the housing capacity analysis. So through this analysis, we'll assess our current land capacity and how much of that land is development ready. Then we will determine how much of our housing need can be accommodated on that land. We like to say that this is the bean counting step. So we must demonstrate how we'll accommodate our 20-year housing need through first our existing land capacity within our urban growth boundary on vacant and partially vacant land, as well as through redevelopment. We'll also look at new capacity within our current urban growth boundary by taking actions to increase the expected capacity of new development. And finally, our remaining need will be accommodated through a UGB expansion. This process is sequential as required by state law. I've outlined in black the step of finding new capacity within our current urban growth boundary. We're going to talk about actions the city can take later in our presentation. So, in addition to ensuring we have enough land supply to accommodate our housing need, we are newly required to create an action plan to meet that need. That will be our housing production strategy. The housing production strategy prioritizes new actions to increase housing production, affordability, and choice. It must also identify and proactively address any fair housing issues in alignment with a federal framework called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. In addition to our 20-year housing need, the state will also allocate an 8-year production target. It is this target that we must take actions to address and against which our progress will be measured. This action plan can include a variety of actions to meet our need, and I'll review these categories in more detail in the next few slides. As I've referenced a few times already, we'll need to take concrete actions towards meeting our housing need, either through finding more efficiency in our land supply or other actions to increase production, affordability, and choice. The city can advance actions that provide information to the public to encourage production, affordability, and choice, such as more community education on housing options, expanding our pre-approved plans program, or initiating education and outreach about voluntary annexation. The city could take action to reduce regulatory barriers to housing, such as code updates to support specific housing types, auditing the land use code to identify and address barriers, and otherwise modernizing our development standards. Additionally, the city could advance actions that increase the capacity and efficiency of our current land supply, such as surgical code changes to ensure more efficient development patterns, targeted rezoning and redesignation, or supporting housing around mixed-use centers. The city will also likely need to adopt new or expanded financial incentives that target local housing needs in Eugene. That could be by affordability, so considering tools that incentivize moderate income, mixed income, or affordable housing. By location, using tools to encourage housing in specific areas, such as along key corridors and in centers, or through voluntary annexation. Or by type, so for example, encouraging smaller housing types. And of course, the city can increase direct investments in housing or in infrastructure that supports housing, such as new revenue options for income qualified housing, land acquisition and disposition, infrastructure investments to support infill development, or street annexations to support voluntary annexation. So there's a lot of work. There's just a lot to unpack generally in this work plan and many actions that the city could choose to implement. So to close the presentation, we're going to outline what topics we expect to bring to you all this year, as well as forecast some upcoming engagement. So as Terry mentioned, we expect to move forward 3 packages of housing actions. In 2026, we expect to bring you a first round of housing and jobs actions focused on reducing known regulatory barriers to housing production or to increase capacity on our current land supply. In 2027, we'll bring a second package of housing and jobs actions, as well as ask you to review the housing production strategy, which will include actions to be taken over 8 years between 2028 and 2035 to meet that identified local need. And then throughout that time, we'll be working on the steps of the UGB expansion analysis, which we'll aim to adopt by 2030. We're already working on the concepts for the first package of housing and jobs actions. And while we're in the early stages of developing those actions, they generally fall into 4 priorities. First is increasing our capacity for housing and reducing regulatory barriers to housing. We're sifting through quite a few actions here, but it will likely include revisiting our multi-unit design standards, considering ways to increase average density in residential zones, and creating a pathway for village-style micro-housing where smaller units share common facilities. Another priority is encouraging compact development of both jobs and housing in and around centers. That includes designating climate-friendly areas, changing code standards in centers, and modernizing our compact development zoning and more. And then finally, reducing barriers to jobs with a specific focus on our employment zones, which are E1 and E2. So we expect to come back to you all several times in 2025, including dedicated work sessions on these initial housing and jobs actions, as well as the comprehensive plan chapters. We're hoping to approach these items in an integrated manner, considering both policies and supporting actions together. We'll be focused on the components of the 2026 adoption package, although we'll be continuing to work on other components for housing planning, as well as actions for 2027 and the housing production strategy, as well as our land supply studies. Of course, we'll be continuing community engagement on these components as well. So as Stuart mentioned, the team is starting to roll out draft chapters of the comprehensive plan for community feedback. We'll be bringing many of these same topics to the Equity Advisory Panel beginning next month, as well as our Housing and Developer Working Group and ETAC. These are only a few highlights, but as Terry said, we'll be continuing broad engagement across the community and offering many opportunities to provide input. So with that, I will stop my presentation and go to you all for your questions and discussion.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I had a question to start, Leah. I'm just curious, to what extent, if it is does the owner factor in the need to keep the supply at a certain robust level in order to ensure that there's kind of a market factor of affordability, or is that something that is considered when it's being calculated? Or I don't know, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about it. I think the best way I would say that it fits that in is it looks at a healthy vacancy rate. So it considers, I think, a 5% plus, maybe 5 to 7% vacancy rate as kind of healthy that it's shooting for. So there is kind of that room built into what they're planning for. I'm not sure if it looks any deeper at a market analysis because it's statewide in nature. But
Makes sense. Commissioner Edwards?
Hey, thanks, Chair Lear. So just question. So if we're looking at like a 20-year horizon and we're estimating like how many units we need annually, and we're breaking that down by how many need to be affordable, how many, you know, and capital A, capital H. I'm just wondering if we're looking at anything that would react to changes in that need. For example, if we are seeing that our vacancy rates are becoming healthy and our wages are going up for whatever reason, maybe there's a number of businesses that come to the area that are higher wage and we're able to grow some jobs and we're able to do some things. Knowing that housing is the most expensive type of housing to deliver, I'm just curious if we are looking at any way to actually not have to bring in 700 units annually. Like, right? So if you're thinking over time, in 10 years, I would hope that we don't have to build as many housing units with subsidies because we're like fixing other things. So I'm just wondering if there's a mechanism in there, maybe through growth monitoring or whatever, that would actually evaluate that and adjust.
Yeah, that's a good question, and there's lots of different probably parts to an answer. So I'll try and keep my thoughts organized. The ONA, the state will allocate need every year. So they are constantly going to be tweaking and fine-tuning, taking in new population forecasts from Portland State. They will be kind of issuing that on an annual basis. So as trends are emerging, that should be incorporated into the state methodology. So there's that. We will eventually lock into a need. So similar to what we did with our currently adopted housing capacity analysis, when we are in the year of adopting that analysis, we'll kind of lock in what the 20-year need was at that point in time. So we will not necessarily be using those annual updates until the next time that we go through this process. The good part about one of the good things in the ONA is that we're now on this 8-year cycle. So that adopted need won't be hanging out forever. It'll be only 8 more years before we kind of do this all again and adopt a new need. So that is pretty dynamic for long range planning. Doesn't sound dynamic, 8 years, but we'll be on that kind of regular cycle. The other thing I'll just add is yes, growth monitoring will be set up to kind of monitor trends in affordable housing development and all our overall housing production. Both of those things will be tracked in a new state dashboard that looks at production trends across all of the cities, and will be kind of compared to our peers. And if we're underperforming, we can kind of get referred into an acceleration program. But if we're overperforming in either or both categories, that'll be reflected kind of in our state reporting and monitoring work.
Thank you. Super helpful. Thanks.
Leah, quick follow-up. Do you know what are the most recent vacancy numbers for our market?
You know, I don't have those off the top of my head. I know Heather's listening, so she might have them in her mind.
And if no one's available and could email me later or something, that'd be great.
Yeah, we can definitely follow up with you on that. That is something we monitor as a part of the growth monitoring program.
Commissioner Isaacson?
Yeah, I have a few questions. First, I know that we are obviously the Eugene Planning Commission, but at some point, when we don't, it's just like any other market, when we don't are not able to meet the needs of the market shifts someplace else. So is there any conversation about Springfield's capacity to backfill and what their development is looking like in terms of how this need is going to be impacted by Eugene and kind of get that overflow? Does that make sense?
Yeah, Springfield is treated the same as Eugene under these new rules. So all cities over 10,000 are. Right. And so they are also getting a new and much larger need that they will have to plan for. They are actually on a comparable timeline to us, maybe just a step behind us on their housing planning work. So they'll be looking at their housing capacity analysis and their housing production strategy around the same time that we are. So they will certainly be needing to take similar steps to increase their housing production and affordability. Did I answer your question, or was there?
I guess what I'm asking is, I would assume that their capacity to build 22,000 new units, or whatever their number is different from ours, good or bad. And so if they're able to overachieve their goal and we're not able to achieve our goal, then people are going to shift over to Springfield. And so the aggregate housing solve for our area has a net effect. So I'm wondering if that is factored in, or you can just, put some color on that.
Yeah, we're not allowed to plan for Springfield to meet our housing needs. That's more simplistic than what you're saying, but we're not allowed to do that by state law. We do consider, I think, in our jobs planning, the fact that we are, an economic region, right? People are commuting across city boundaries, right? And in from other parts of Lane County to work here. So we do consider that in terms of the trends that we're planning for. But yes, we have to plan independently from Springfield. And yeah, Terry, do you have something to add?
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you to add the part about peer cities and evaluating us with our peer cities.
Yeah, and so it's a little different than what you're saying, Commissioner Isaacson, but that housing acceleration program that I referenced, we, as we are tracking our production, both overall and of specifically affordable housing, the state will be kind of comparing us to our peers, and the lower performing cities will be referred into this program. So our peer cities tend to be of similar size to us. So some of the bigger cities across the state, including like Salem, Beaverton, Gresham, but it also includes peers in our region. So Springfield is one of our peer cities. Corvallis is one of our peer cities. So in terms of tracking how well we're doing, it will consider our peers.
Just to get an idea of the size of what we're talking about here, to hit that number for just the 0 to 80% AMI, we would need to build 211 Peace Village-sized developments over 20 years. That's almost 11 per year. And it took 2 years, I think, to build, right? So that's a big nut to be able to go after, right? So with the federal priorities shifting, policy is definitely moving around. How much of the analysis that we're looking at is relying on assumptions based on federal funding that existed prior to 3.5 months ago?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say that the ONA doesn't consider funding, kind of point blank. Like it attempting to be a more comprehensive picture of what our need is. It's not saying that there is a realistic resources to actually build that much housing in the next few years. So I think the ONA sets a high bar, and most cities are not going to meet that bar in the next couple of years, right? But it really is trying to drive home the point that we are severely underproducing housing to meet our needs, and that we're going to have to figure out collectively, local, state, and federal levels, how to meet that need through traditional funding means, but also through, creative strategies to look at how we can provide affordability differently, to ensure we have enough land to continue reducing regulatory barriers. But the ONA doesn't assume a certain level of investment from the state or the federal level.
That's kind of what I expected. Thank you. What are developers saying? I mean, I know that I talked a little bit ago about having a different measuring stick that we're using. So if if I was having this conversation in front of a group of developers, what would they be telling me in terms of here's the number that the city is saying we need to hit, or the more importantly, the state is saying we need to hit through the city. What is a feasible number that they can see them growing beyond their expectation if they just continued on as normal? You know, we want additional 700 units. What is the number that they think is feasible, and what is preventing them from being able to achieve that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have met with our Housing and Development Working Group a handful of times, and we've brought them the draft version of these numbers. So they've actually seen a slightly higher number than what the state came out with, kind of the official numbers on January 1st. Most, I think, developers, and especially affordable housing developers, have said, yeah, that makes sense. Our need is that big. I know specifically some have said, like, we shouldn't be scared of this number. It's a big task that we're going to have to stand up and meet. And while the city can do a lot, and they have given us plenty of thoughts and ideas of what the city can do to support more housing production and affordability, all the levers that we have, there are also challenges outside of the city's control. Market forces, financing, cost of construction, cost of labor. So even, you know, if the city pulled down all of our regulatory barriers tomorrow, those other types of market forces and barriers would continue to exist. So I think this moves us in the right direction. We're all getting on the same page, you know, the city and the development community about where we're heading. And just need to figure out what the priority actions are to take over the next few years.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this part of the presentation? Commissioner Beeson?
Yeah, I spent quite a bit of time on that, quite a bit of time. It's your slide 24. It's the chart that shows, I think you call them the affordability bins.
Yeah.
AMI categories. It was sort of fascinating to me. I don't know, it just sort of caught my eye, and then I got too obsessive. So I'll try to be careful here. The symmetry of it, I found sort of strange. I don't want to go too far down any of these roads. Let me just say a couple of things. I found it kind of, so the numbers in there are units of housing, and they're the numbers, they're the units we need over the 20-year period in each of the AMI categories. And it was curious to me that on the greater than 120% AMI, the number of units needed in Eugene over the next 20 years appeared to roughly equal the number of units we might need if it was less than 30% AMI. And I just keep, I don't know that you even need to try to answer this. I just kept thinking, well, it just seemed to me that we would need quite a few more on the lower end of the income ranges going forward. Mm-hmm. And that's not so much a question as maybe a comment. I trust your numbers. If you want to.
Well, they're not my numbers. That's
well,
the state's numbers.
The state's numbers. Yes.
I can characterize it a little bit more. So almost 60% of our need is from 0 to 80% of the median income, which is a level of affordability that new housing does not reach unless it is subsidized. Sometimes older, existing housing might be kind of more naturally affordable, but new housing certainly is not without major subsidy. So that's a lot of our need, almost 60% of our need. And it, assumes a pretty significant increase in production at that affordability level. And part of the reason our need is so large on the kind of lower income side is because that's where our historic underproduction of housing has kind of been. The market does a good job, relatively, of producing new housing that's affordable to folks at the, who make more than the median for our community. There's certainly barriers at every level, but that's kind of what the market is kind of naturally attuned to build without subsidy. What we have been underproducing for and what the ONA kind of newly accounts for is the fact that we have a deficit on the ground right now. And we have a deficit specifically for people who are currently homeless or transitioning out of homelessness. So I think more than being struck by the market rate numbers, I think we've been struck by the significant need for more affordable units and how big of a task that will be.
Yeah. I think it just struck me, it just seemed like the chart showed that we had underproduced in the higher income levels, if I'm reading it right. And it was counterintuitive.
Yeah, so it's not all underproduction. The ONA also accounts just for population growth over the next 20 years and, new households forming. It also accounts for units that might be lost to second and vacation homes, which are going to fall into those more market rate units. So that graph of affordability is encompassing our whole need, which is inclusive of our current unmet need, but also our future need, which, is for all incomes. And it's a little misleading kind of the way the 5 bars are. And I'll actually just pull it up again so you can kind of see. But the median is pretty far to the right on the chart. So 100% AMI, the median is all the way over here. It's not kind of in the middle. So,
Leah, you're not sharing.
Oops. I am.
You're sharing in your mind.
One step away. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but the median income is kind of right here.
Yeah.
So when you think about this as like the halfway point, it maybe makes a little bit more sense. But yeah, it's a good observation, Commissioner Beeson. Terry, I think you were going to say something as well.
I was just going to add some of the things that will continue to bring you over the year get at additional factors besides income. They get at the types, characteristics, and location of housing. So if you stop and think about each of those things, types of housing, are they single detached? Are they townhouses? Are they cottage clusters? Are they ADUs? We're going to need to look at the needs of our population in every income bracket for every type of housing. That's a very comprehensive analysis. And then also the characteristics of the housing. Does it need to be accessible? Does it need to be big? Does it need to be small? Lots of different factors there. And then again, the locations, which come into play about, are they near transit? Are they near mixed use centers? Are they in areas of opportunity in the city where historically we haven't seen a lot of variety in housing types? So we'll be looking at all of that in a big document called the Contextualized Housing Need, which is terribly difficult to say word, but it's basically a report that puts into context Eugene's people and our needs for housing relative to the numbers that were handed down to us by the state.
Okay. The only other thing this is kind of, Commissioner Isaacson was getting at this too, and staring at that chart, it seemed like there's clearly a lot of 27,000 units in the next 20 years is a lot. And close to 60% of that needs to be affordable. And I think what I carry some broad assumptions I get, and I should be corrected on them at times, but I generally assume that affordable housing, particularly on that, as it gets down in the lower end of the AMI, means sometimes pretty substantial amounts of money and financing need to be found to make that happen. And I think we can go through the work that we're talking about, which we should, and look at regulatory barriers and all of that. But I'm making a broad assumption. At the end of the day, there needs to be quite a lot of money. And not to understate it, but there's not a lot going on right now, either at the local level, state level, or national level, to make one think that kind of money might be forthcoming. So again, it's kind of a comment. It's our task, and it's not just ours. I mean, clearly it's in this state. I mean, I saw something too, but I think it was Maine or there's, all around. There are just tremendous housing shortages everywhere. So I'll just kind of leave it as a comment. I think it's kind of a fascinating piece of work that we're engaged in, and I'm assuming the 20-year period started last month. It started in January of 2025, right? So we're sort of on the clock right now at 1,600 units a year, and it'll be interesting it's a good piece of work to be engaged in. I'm just interested in it to see how it goes. So I'll leave it.
It's a good observation, Commissioner Beeson, and certainly well articulates the kind of pickle we are in, and it's going to take a long time to dig out of our current deficit of housing.
Commissioner Isaacson?
To kind of echo what Commissioner Beeson was saying, I guess I just have a really basic math question. Based on the available space that Eugene has, how many units are available if you had a magic wand to build right now?
I think you're.
I don't know off the top. We do have the buildable lands inventory, so that is the closest we have to kind of knowing exactly how much could be built. That will be updated as a part of this process, so we'll have a better sense of, on our current land supply, what can we realistically assume in our current urban growth boundary. And that is why Terry forecasted, we expect we'll need to do a UGB expansion. These numbers are too big to accommodate through efficiencies alone. We do have to follow the state mandated kind of sequential process to get there, but we think it is likely we are going to need to do that at this point.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it just seems like a fairly, I don't want to use the word basic, but I'm not even sure what word to use, math equation to be able to say, we're using this much space for housing developments. We're going to need X number of them. X and Y times each other gives you this much space. This is how much space we have. It's like your possibilities and limits are. And I don't think that it's bad to shy away from the large number or hide that or pretend that it doesn't exist. It exists, right? I mean, the analysis, the data is what the data is, and I don't think we adjust the data to make ourselves feel better or to create a goal that we can achieve to pat ourselves on the back to not ultimately help the problem that we're trying to solve, but on that other end, I think that it's important that the public realizes the size of the mountain we're trying to climb here, and recognizes that it's an all hands on deck approach that's going to need, business, it's going to need, the city's going to be philanthropic, private development, all those things that working in tandem. So, thank you.
Yeah, I had a quick question. I was curious if there is anything new on the state level that might address the conflict between pre-existing CCNRs and middle housing or other forms of more dense development.
I think I'll throw that to Alyssa. She's our legislative liaison.
There is a House bill that contains language that would, I guess, make those go away. We're not sure it's actually legal or will move forward, but there is a House bill that does talk about doing just that.
Appreciate that.
I wanted to add something on to Commissioner Isaacson's question, if I may. You were asking about numbers and the simple math, or the math, not the simple math, the math involved in calculating our needs. And I just wanted to iterate that we will be bringing you numbers. We'll be bringing a lot of numbers to ETAC, which is our technical advisory committee, a lot of numbers, methodology, and maps to be vetted through that group. But we'll also bring summaries of all of that to the Planning Commission, and there will be numbers for each step in the equation. So the BLI, the Buildable Lands Inventory, will show how many units we think we can accommodate and where. And then we'll have to assign numbers to new capacity actions if we're proposing to increase density, how many units do you think that will accommodate? And so for each step, that all adds up to eventually the leftover need being accommodated by UGB expansion. And then there's a lot of work involved in that as well. So not only analyzing the land, but planning for it and making assumptions about density and working with utility providers and all of those things. So they're all on deck, and we'll be coming forward as we progress.
Okay, well, thanks to everybody. Thanks, Terry and Leah and Stuart. Next on our agenda is items from commission and staff. Are there any items or info to share from commissioners? And staff, look to you, Alyssa.
Sure, I don't have much either. Just to let you know, your next two meetings are the 18th and 25th of February. On the 18th, you'll be finishing your deliberations on the Braywood appeal. And on the 25th is you'll be having a work session on the city's capital improvement program. Just as an FYI, tomorrow the council is going to receive, at their noon work session, they'll have a presentation similar to the one you had tonight, a little shorter. But you know, if you want the same information, you can listen in and hear their questions as well. Also, recruitment for the Planning Commission closed at the end of the month. We have over 20 applications. Next steps is that those go to the council for them to vote on who they want to proceed to the steps where there's, they tend to do an interview process. And then ultimately you'll have 2 positions filled by July 1. That's all I have.
Well, if that's everything, thank you all. This meeting of the Planning Commission is now adjourned. Hope everyone has a great rest of your week.